Raynor from Heroes of the Storm.
Fill your enemies full of daylight.
That's the kind of line Jim Raynor's kit promised. For years, the actual experience of playing him was a lot less exciting. Stand in lane, auto attack, repeat. We're starting here on purpose, because before we get to the legendary community-breaking reworks later in this list, it helps to see what a quiet, successful one actually looks like. Raynor has been in Heroes of the Storm since the game's earliest days. A straightforward ranged assassin built around basic attacks, a knockback shot called Penetrating Round, and his iconic Hyperion ultimate calling in an orbital strike. He was reliable, easy to pick up, and beloved by players who wanted a no-frills Marine with no gap closers to worry about learning. But his talent tree was, by Blizzard's own admission, one of the oldest and least updated in the entire game, full of narrow situational picks that had gone untouched since launch. On July 10th, 2018, as part of the same patch that reworked Asmodin, Blizzard shipped what their own patch notes called Raynor's long-awaited rework, language that directly acknowledged how long the community had been asking for it. The headline change was a brand new trait, Give 'em some pepper, which triggers every fourth basic attack to splash in a small area for 125% extra damage to the main target, massively boosting his ability to clear minion waves, something the old kit was genuinely bad at. His self-heal, adrenaline rush got reworked too, now restoring 25% of his max health over just 1 second, with basic attacks cutting its cooldown down further, doubled specifically against enemy heroes. But the bigger structural change was underneath the hood. Blizzard rebuilt his entire talent tree from the ground up, adding new options at nearly every tier. What this meant in practice was that Raynor stopped being a pick him and forget the talent screen hero. Suddenly, there were real build decisions. Lean into sustain with adrenaline rush upgrades, or go full aggression stacking attack speed and armor talents. Blizzard's developers were explicit that this rework had been shaped directly by roughly a year of community feedback, which is a rare level of transparency for a "we listened" patch.
Listen, but let me say it, man. Listen, but we don't judge.
Raynor's rework isn't flashy. It's not a new ultimate or a new resource system, but it's a perfect baseline for what we're measuring all night. Did the developers change the map, alter how something functions, or delete something outdated? Here, it was the last two, a modernized trait and a rebuilt talent tree. Lee Sin from Honor of Kings. If Honor of Kings sounds unfamiliar, that's exactly why he's placed early on this list. Teamy Studios' flagship MOBA has one of the largest player bases on the planet, dwarfing most Western MOBAs in raw numbers, even while it's still building name recognition outside Asia and Southeast Asia. Lee Sin is a Clash lane fighter whose entire kit revolves around his revenge, or dark, form. A more aggressive combat state meant to reward players who could weave between his two identities mid-fight. In practice, community build guides and tier list data consistently placed him below where his kit's ambition suggested he should sit, especially once counters that punished his lack of flexibility showed up in the draft. The fix landed on June 17, 2026, as part of Honor of Kings Plus version update, a major patch that reworked over 90 heroes at once.
Doesn't this seem like too much stuff?
With Lee Sin singled out for one of the deepest overhauls in the update. The aftermath happened fast enough to document in the same patch cycle. Official balance notes admitted Lee Sin was rather weak right now, but that his revenge form had become very hard to counter, so the very next round of tuning boosted his stats in both forms, especially early game, while deliberately cutting his mobility in revenge form specifically to give opponents a chance to chase him down. That's a rework, an admission it undershot in one direction and a correction, all within weeks, a compressed version of the multi-year arc other heroes on this list took to go through. Lee Sin's arc proves the biggest lesson on this list applies everywhere, not just in the games you already know. Now, let's go from a duelist split between light and dark to a god whose entire mythology is built on lightning, and who, for years, didn't feel like it. Thor from Smite. Imagine being the god of thunder, and your signature attack in battle is a slow, clunky channel that most players avoided using because they weren't sure when it was actually safe to cast. That was Thor's problem for years in Smite, and Hi-Rez's fix for it became one of the most talked about mid-season reworks the game has done. Thor entered Smite all the way back in the game's closed beta in September of 2012, a jungle assassin built around burst damage and a Fisher-slamming ultimate. He got a visual refresh early on, but his actual kit calcified for years. Hi-Rez's own developers admitted the core problem directly in their patch notes. Berserker Barrage had too long a cooldown and too long a channel time, and it wasn't clear to players when they should even use it. The mid-season rework attacked that problem head-on. Berserker Barrage went from a slow channel to a quick 3-part spin, hitting enemies in front up to 3 times and enemies behind him up to 2. But the bigger change was thematic. Hi-Rez added an entirely new passive component called Anvil of Dawn. After landing his ultimate, Thor's hammer becomes infused with lightning for 6 seconds, every basic attack and ability during that window arcs electricity to nearby enemy gods. Hi-Rez's design goal, stated directly in the patch notes, was to give Thor a more distinct identity among the game's other assassins. For the first time, his kit actually used lightning as a mechanic, not just as flavor text on his splash art. The immediate result, according to Hi-Rez's own follow-up patch notes, was that Thor's pick and ban rate at high-level play spiked hard, but his win rate didn't follow at the same pace, which meant players were drafting him more without necessarily winning more. Hi-Rez watched that gap in the data and community feedback for several months before dialing back some of his ultimate's burst damage, a rare example of a developer publicly walking back part of a rework rather than reverting it outright. Thor's rework didn't reinvent the god. It just gave the god of thunder a reason to feel like thunder. Now, from one of gaming's oldest gods to a legendary that's only existed for about 2 years, and a revamp so small and so recent that some of you watching might not have even noticed it happened. Ho-Oh from Pokemon Unite. Ho-Oh launched in July of 2024 as a defender with a genuinely unique identity. Its Unite move, Rekindling Flame, can revive fallen teammates by spending all of its accumulated energy, a support tank fantasy no other legendary in the game shares. But its signature traversal move, simply called Fly, was pure mobility. It let Ho-Oh soar over walls and move faster while airborne and did nothing else. No damage, no utility beyond positioning. For a legendary Pokemon whose entire mythology is a rainbow of destructive flame that felt like a missed opportunity, and players noticed almost immediately. In the U-Impact update, the developers didn't just buff Fly, they deleted it outright and replaced it with an entirely new move, Sacred Fire. It keeps the flight and speed boost from before, but now the cast itself shoots a blast of mystical fire that damages and burns anyone caught in it, while boosting Ho-Oh's next 3 basic attacks into empowered strikes. Community reaction split along a predictable line. Some longtime Ho-Oh players missed the pure utility escape tool Fly offered, arguing the old version was safer for a defender whose job is survival, not damage. But the majority embraced Sacred Fire.
Ho-Oh, and I gotta say, I love it. I love the change. Fire Spin might still be the thing, because Fire Spin is kind of already.
But buffing Ho, of course, is very scary, but finally it has its signature move, and I think it's pretty cool.
With Reddit and Facebook discussion largely converging on the same verdict, this finally gave Ho-Oh the living rainbow of flame identity its own mythology always promised. Ho-Oh's story is a reminder that a revamp doesn't need a new map, a new stance, or a new ultimate. Sometimes deleting one underwhelming button and replacing it with a better one is enough to redefine how a hero feels. Engineer from Heroes of Newerth. Heroes of Newerth launched in 2011, one of the earliest and most faithful successors to the original Defense of the Ancients mod. An engineer joined its roster as a ranged intelligence hero built around a deployable steam turret. On release, that turret was, by the community's own account, one of the single most overpowered abilities in the game's history, dealing serious damage on its own, inheriting engineers' items, and functioning like a second hero on the field. Years of nerfs and bug fixes never fully tamed it. So developers did what almost no other studio on this list did. They gave the turret a complete rework, rebuilding it from the ground up in an attempt to make it balanceable. According to community guides from that era, the community immediately started raging, and S2 Games had to buff Engineer right back up to keep him viable. Then, in version 4.7.3, the developers went further still. They explicitly reverted large parts of his kit back toward the pre-rework design, stating plainly in the patch notes that the newer steam turret iteration had been incredibly difficult to balance across different situations, and that the older version was simply more stable. They kept some of the rework's ideas, like added versatility as a support pick, but rebuilt spider mines with new stacking limits to avoid recreating the exact same overpowered pattern. That makes Engineer's story structurally different from everyone else on this list. This isn't a straight line from outdated to modern. It's outdated, overcorrected, and then partially reverted once developers admitted the fix had created a new problem. And there's a deeper irony underneath it. Heroes of New Earth's official servers shut down on June 20th, 2022, but the community had a working replacement, Project Kongor, running an open beta just 46 days later, eventually drawing over 7,000 concurrent players and a Discord community more than 130,000 strong. The hero who got unreworked now lives on in a game the community rebuilt from scratch after the studio walked away. Engineer shows that a revamp can matter just as much to a few thousand loyal players as it does to millions, and that sometimes the greatest fix for a broken rework is admitting it was a mistake. Clinkz from Dota 2. There's a version of Dota 2 where Clinkz is basically a ghost story, an invisible skeleton archer whose signature ability was, of all things, a heal spell you autocast on a nearby creep and forget about. Clinkz, the Bone Fletcher, has been in Dota since the original mod era, a fragile ranged agility hero built around ambushing lone targets with skeleton walk, his signature invisibility. For most of his life, he was a build-around-me pub pick, strong in the right hands, nearly unplayable in the wrong ones, and mostly ignored at the professional level. A community write-up from DotaBuff in 2017 put it bluntly, describing him as worse than ever, good at solo pickoffs and nothing else, falling off hard the moment a game turned into a team fight. The rework didn't happen all at once. It built up over years. Back in patch 7.06, Death Pack's duration was extended from 35 to 65 seconds just to make the ability less awkward to maintain. But the real turning point was patch 7.27b in July 2020. Valve took Death Pact, a support-flavored sustain tool, and turned it into an instant execute. Cast it now and Clinkz kills the target outright, absorbing its health and dealing bonus damage as a temporary steroid. Valve then swapped his identity again in patch 7.33, replacing searing arrows entirely with the AoE-focused tar bomb before partially reverting that change in patch 7.40. The payoff was measurable. Patch 7.40c notes from early 2026 describe a Clinkz who become one of the most contested heroes in high-ranked pubs, with a win rate pushing 54% in the upper brackets, strong enough that Valve had to nerf his building damage and strip an Aghanim Scepter upgrade just to bring him back down to earth. Clinkz proves a rework doesn't need a new map or a new item slot. Sometimes it just needs to take the one ability everyone ignores and make it the whole point. Lapu-Lapu from Mobile Legends. Lapu-Lapu launched as one of Mobile Legends' earliest heroes, built around a dual-weapon fantasy, twin blades for speed, a heavy sword for devastating burst. It's a great pitch, and across Southeast Asia, where Mobile Legends is one of the most played games on the entire platform, this is a hero almost everyone watching has picked, banned, or died to. The revamp rebuilt him around fluid stance switching. Players can now weave between the twin blade poke style and the heavy sword burst style far more freely. Justice Blades throws twin boomerangs that can hit a fleeing target up to 4 times as they travel out and back. Land into his ultimate bravest fighter, and Lapu-Lapu combines his blades mid-air, slams into the ground, and enters heavy sword stance for 10 full seconds. Enhanced skills, extra defense, and basic attacks boosted to 120% damage. From there, his signature move, Raging Slash, unleashes 3 heavy sword strikes that can't be interrupted, each one letting him change direction and reposition, dealing up to 440 bonus physical damage on the final hit. Even the names changed to reflect the new identity. Hero's Faith became Homeland Defender, Chieftain's Rage became Bravest Fighter. Small touches, but they signal Moonton treated this as a full identity refresh, not a numbers patch. What this unlocks in practice is versatility. Old Lapu-Lapu asked you to commit to one playstyle per fight. New Lapu-Lapu lets you read the fight and adapt mid-engage, poke from range if you're outmatched, or dive straight into heavy sword mode the moment you get an opening. Coverage from One Esports at the time of the rework specifically praised the added flexibility rather than raw power, and that distinction mattered to the community. Casual players who'd always found him clunky picked him up for the first time. Veteran mains who'd already learned to work around the old stance lock were more divided. Some appreciated the freedom, others felt it diluted what made mastering the old, riskier version feel rewarding in the first place. Lapu-Lapu's revamp is proof that sometimes the greatest rework isn't about deleting a mechanic. It's about finally letting players use the one that was already there. And that brings us to the finale. A rework so significant, so debated, that old versus new isn't just a phrase in this video. It's an ongoing argument in League of Legends that still hasn't ended. Aatrox from League of Legends. When Aatrox launched, he was pitched as a demonic, life-draining swordsman. But his actual kit was built around a resource system where his abilities cost his own health and slowly healed it back, revolving around an unreliable leap that rarely landed the way you wanted. The fantasy on the splash art and the feeling in your hands didn't match, and it stayed that way for years. Riot's own design team eventually admitted the gap plainly in their own patch notes. The promise of his art and theme was never actually delivered by his gameplay, and they left it unaddressed for far too long. In May of 2019, Riot didn't tweak Aatrox. It deleted the old hero. Riot's designers called it, at the time, the single largest pure gameplay update they'd ever done to one champion, with literally every ability rebuilt from scratch. The health cost resource system was gone. In its place, the Darkened Blade, a 3-part combo where each successive swing hits a wider arc and rewards aggressive positioning, and World Ender, a transformation ultimate that turns Aatrox into a hulking greatsword duelist who can revive after landing a kill mid-fight. Early versions of that revive were controversial enough on their own. Riot spent several follow-up patches specifically dialing back how safe and guaranteed it felt, precisely because it had made him too forgiving to dive with. The reaction genuinely split the community, and Riot's own community team documented it directly. New and returning players loved it. Aatrox finally played like his own splash art, but longtime mains pushed back hard enough that Riot staff showed up in person inside the community dedicated to Aatrox to address the backlash. Boards and Reddit posts from the time described the new kit as turning a beloved auto-attacking duelist into something closer to a clunkier Riven. Same aggression, different soul, with some old mains saying outright they felt like their champion had been quietly deleted and replaced with a stranger wearing his face.
I mean, Jarvan might be trading this well, though, to be honest.
Riot even weighed community requests to bring back his old wing animations as a compromise, though they ultimately kept the new, clearer design for gameplay readability reasons. That old versus new argument never fully went away. It's still one of the most cited examples in the genre of a developer trading a beloved identity for a functional one. From Raynor's quiet modernization to Aatrox's total rebirth, every revamp on this list proves the same point. The greatest hero reworks in MOBA history were never really about numbers. They were about developers, and sometimes just players, refusing to let a good idea stay broken, even when fixing it meant breaking a few hearts along the way. If you've got a revamp you think deserved a spot on this list, drop it below. We might be doing a part 2. Like and subscribe.